All right, we're live. Welcome to the next episode of the Kink Tank, and this time we're going to be talking about, we're going to do slut shaming. Well, we're not actually going to do slut shaming, so I'm sorry if some of you showed up to the panel hoping that you'd be slut shamed tonight. We're going to be talking about slut shaming, not just in our community, but just sort of in general in, I don't know, our everyday culture. So let's talk about what slut shaming is, for one. Anyone? Slut shaming. It sounds pretty self-explanatory.
Feel bad for being slutty, for sleeping around, or for being overly sexual, or whatever your definition of being slutty is.
Right, and that's part of it, though. It's like the moving target, because everybody has a different idea of what being slutty is. And so, you know, the old George Carlin, everyone driving faster than you is a maniac, everyone driving slower than you is an asshole, or an idiot, I think it was. So it's kind of, it's relative. So slut shaming is basically making somebody feel bad for being more promiscuous than you. So what's the value in that? You know, why do people do that?
Those people make some people feel uncomfortable. Like they're more sexual than you, which either makes you feel like you're, you know, not sexual enough, so maybe you'd like for those people to feel bad and stop doing that. Or it just makes you uncomfortable on like a moral, ethical, religious level, maybe.
Yeah. I wish that were the case. I kind of feel like a lot of times it's just to have something to talk about.
Just to be a jerk.
Just to be a jerk.
Yeah, it can be the center of like bullying or gossip, or doesn't really. Yeah, just like it's just something you can do to like show power over someone else in like a hurtful way.
Tear somebody down to make you feel better.
Exactly.
I would completely agree with Kenzie there. I think that it's definitely something that's, I think, employed more with the same sex versus the opposite sex. I think it's something that's employed. The most times I've heard it is when it's one female, I guess, slut shaming another female, making, you know, you're over sexualized, so I'm in a higher class, or I'm in I'm a better person than you are, and it's a way for one female almost to rise, you know, bring themselves up.
So it's a competitive or a jealous thing most of the time, you think?
I think it's to hurt, yeah, more of it's to hurt.
Because I do think that there's a fair amount of shaming that goes on sort of cross-gender, you know, men that maybe not shaming them like saying so, like, oh, you're a dirty slut and you have so many sex partners and you're gross or whatever, but it's kind of like a judgment that some people make, like, I don't want to be around this person, or I don't want them near my friends, or I don't, you know, where it's not like slut shaming is the outcome of that, you know, when people actually verbalize it. I don't know, you know, before that there are judgments that come. Oh, they just sleep around with everybody. You know, I'd like to be able to get rid of that idea in my head. You know, if I'm judging somebody and their sexual activities, I'm not going to be a slut shamer if I can first fix the idea in my head that what they do isn't my business and it's all relative to me, and that I don't really have room to judge. Is there any way to get rid of that? Or is that just kind of human?
Well, I think you have to know like what it is that's actually bothering you with those people. Like, is them being slutty really the thing that bothers you, or are you bothered because they don't want to slut around with you? Or are you bothered because
or do they slut around with your boyfriend?
You don't want to be with. Like, you don't really have an issue with them sleeping around, but you think they have bad boundaries and therefore don't want to be involved with them, but that's too complicated for you to think about, so you just tell them they're a whore. It's like an easy way out, I think.
Yeah. Have you ever been like hit on by that guy on FetLife or online or something, and then you're like, thanks but no thanks, and you know, I don't think we're really compatible. You're just a slut.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like it's just the thing, because it seems to me like it's one of those things that's an easy target. It's universally sort of accepted as something that people should be able to pick on people about. So it's either you're fat, you're ugly, or you're a slut. You know, those are like the three that you can go to and never, you know, because it's all relative, isn't it? So you're never
Yeah.
wrong. It's just when somebody calls you a slut when you're actually the bigger slut, that you know, when you're slut shaming somebody and you have no room to be slut shaming.
Well, it's always a loaded topic. Like, no one ever takes it well. That's same as like a fat joke. Like, you can't ever have that be like, you know, going into it that you're gonna hit pay dirt, because very few people can just turn their other cheek and then just say, you know, it's not a big deal. It
thanks.
usually is.
Which is the right answer. If anyone ever, you know, calls you a slut, just say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
own it.
Exactly. Just own it.
It is one of those things that I consider a cheap shot. You know,
Exactly.
It's low hanging fruit. You didn't even have to, you know, think through what kind of insult you're going to hurl at somebody. You're just like, you're stupid. You know, you're big slut.
Yeah, it doesn't even mean anything. It's just a mean name you can call someone. You don't even know what it. And a lot of times people use that word. People aren't even slutty. Like they're like monogamous. They've been with the same person for 5 years, and then it's just like a name you can hurl at someone, like stupid
Yeah,
or.
but they dress like a slut, or they flirt like a slut,
Yeah,
or they
wear.
have way more sex with you, even though it might be with the same person.
Right.
You know, or they have sex in public, or they, whatever. You know, I agree.
I was just reading this article in Psychology Today. I linked it in the group, and it kind of says the exact same thing, that it actually doesn't even, the research that they did find that it wasn't always associated with sex at all. And they found that when higher status women use the term against lower status women, it often simply meant low class or trashy. It wasn't actually about sex.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a perception of actions and behaviors that aren't necessarily directly related to sex, but flirting, dress, appearance, mannerisms, behaviors. I think all of that, I think, it can very easily be expressed as, you know, fun and enjoyment and, you know, just a way to interact with people outside of daily vanilla life that ends up becoming looked upon, you know, in a negative way.
Yeah, and maybe getting more desirable attention from others that you would rather have.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
I
the
agree
boys
with
are
a lot of
talking
that.
to you.
In one of my
in kink community, we have the whole play aspect too. It's not just, you know, how you dress or you know, the flirting, the look, you know, there's also who you play with or how many partners you have and so forth. Go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, in one of my sociology classes, we actually kind of discussed this a little bit within the terms or within the viewpoint of feminism, and how a lot of feminists will, you know, employ a lot of these slut-shaming type of tactics towards other women who they deem are doing feminism wrong, giving women a bad name. And it's almost like almost a reverse slut shaming at sometimes. You know, how dare you want to stay home and be a mother and raise kids? You know, you're giving us all, you know, we've worked so hard to get where we are, and now you're, you know, choosing to go and do feminism wrong now that you have the choice to, you know, basically do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, there can be quite a backlash for sex positive feminists.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you combine feminism with hypocrite and come up with femmicrit?
I like it.
Is that like a subsect of feminism? Like, you got legit feminists here, like the good ones, but then like these whole femmicrits over here. Bad one.
Well, and that's an argument. There have been a lot of things written about that topic, and a lot of feminists who really feel adrift in this. You know, there are factions within the feminist movement. And we're not really going to go into that, but yeah, it can be a problem, and people consider, you know, slutting around as being empowering for women. You know, that this is what we worked for. You know, that we're at we want the same status as men. You know, because I didn't want to have this conversation without talking about double standards between men and women. So let's get into a little bit of that, not just in society at large, but in our community? Are there double standards? What are those double standards? Your thoughts?
Well, would anybody argue that there wasn't? I mean, so the slut shaming is a female only thing, right?
No.
No, but I think it's definitely worse though for a woman
it is
versus
much
a man.
worse.
If you call a man a slut, you're probably going to get a thanks.
Except
that's awesome.
Well,
it's socially
you
acceptable.
actually get made fun of for being a virgin.
Right.
If
Exactly.
you're not a slut.
Well, here's the thing: is I'm not saying that slut shaming is not limited to calling somebody a slut. A lot of people use the word slut when they're talking to females.
But
and they don't readily.
The expression. The thing is we use the word slut generally when it comes to women. But how many times have we heard people say, "Oh, that guy's such a dog"?
Okay.
True.
Yeah, some other derogatory term like that.
Same,
it's still slut
But that
shaming.
word can also be used positively. Oh, you sly dog.
Yeah, but what it is?
Yeah, you did. You get. Yeah,
but milk and slut. That's not a good frame of reference.
Here's the issue I've seen.
You use the word slut positively. Oh, you sexy slut. Yeah, you did. You were slutty.
Women seem to be chided for having sex. Men seem to be chided for having sex in a way that's perceived to be unethical.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, have you ever heard the saying like
Yes.
crap, it's like a key that unlocks many locks is a good key, but a lock that's opened by a lot of keys is a bad lock.
Oh,
and
that's
it's referred to like men and women.
Interesting metaphor.
I hear that a lot. Like,
so
true.
So we got like skeleton dicks.
Well,
So
a
it's
man
like-
who's
thank
promiscuous,
you,
or a
Josie.
man who has lots of partners is a player, or he's a sexy bachelor. But a woman who has a lot of partners, or a
Is
woman who flirts a
slutty.
lot or plays a lot, she's
Mhm.
slutty and she's easy and she's
But to be
tone of
fair,
the words is always different for women.
those are things that are changing though, because interestingly enough, there seems to be more and more association with age. Like I find that as women get older and they care less, it's hard to call somebody names if they don't care that you're calling them names. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of older women now, I'd say, like, say 35 and older, who are now referred to as cougars and are, like, claiming it as a title. Like, fuck you, yeah. Gonna get a
Yeah,
bone
but I
whatever
think
you
that's a lot more
want.
common in community as opposed to a greater trend in the population of humans in.
I don't know. I've seen it more. Like, being on Facebook and having, some more conservative friends on there sometimes, you tend to see these conversations that come up in sort of like magazine articles, whether it be Cosmo or any of those kinds of things. It's one of those kinds of things that seems to be catching on, but generally only when you get to that, get to an age. It's kind of like you've had one child or two children, you've been married and been divorced, you've kind of earned your fucking. Like, you went through all of the appropriate steps, now you may enjoy yourself.
Oh.
True, there are a lot of mainstream movies that are starting to talk about that, like post-divorce days.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And you know what? I think that goes back really well to what Michael was saying, in that sometimes slut shaming is not just use of the word slut, but changing your behavior or having perceptions of people and perhaps spreading those perceptions or attempting to spread those perceptions to other people. It's not just about the word slut. And so those two go together really well for me, in that it's hard. It's a lot easier to look at maybe a younger woman that probably should have responsibilities in life and maybe doesn't, than someone that is just out of a bad marriage and wants to go have a little fucking fun.
Or a little fun fucking.
Thank you for
Sorry,
that.
why can't a younger person have fun fucking?
They can.
Uh-huh. What was that?
No, they can. But that's my point, is that in society at large, not just in the community, there seems to be this sense, right? Like, I'm really not a big proponent in this country of the abstinence education that people have. One, because it doesn't work, but I think it creates this real imbalance of making women sort of the key holders of sex, like the gatekeepers, right? Like, guys are all ready to go all the time. There's never a question about that. It's really only the women that are holding us up, quite frankly, right? And so there seems to be this point where we expect younger women to be chaste coming out of high school because that's the education that literally they have received. But there seems to be this almost anti-indoctrination that happens as you age, where you get to a certain point, it's like, all right, clearly our brainwashing has worn off on this one. We'll just let them go.
I'm not so sure that it's due to that. I think you make a better point before, when you're basically saying that it's hard to slut shame somebody when that word just kind of rolls off of them. You know, and I think that people's perception, at least anyways, is that an experienced person is not going to have their feelings hurt as much by being called a slut or being derided as such than a younger person, or let's say a less experienced person, that they're going to actually take that to heart, or it's going to, you know, if you can hurt them with it, then, you know, it's effective. But if you know it's going to bounce right off, so, you know, then why bother with it? And I think that there might be a little bit of that, where people are less likely to refer to older people as sluts, because the point is to hurt them. And if they know that they can't hurt them with that, then they just won't bother.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, it seems disrespectful to use that word to someone who's over 30, but it seems perfectly okay to use it if you're under 30. Have you ever noticed that too? Like, slut has an age limit on it before it doesn't seem like it suits anymore.
Well, I would say that young
You
people
may have
also
to be
tend
a
to be
woman
broke.
to understand that
They
one.
don't have any money. If we go back to the Psychology Today, and I just found a Slate.com article that was really interesting and kind of the same thing. If it's about socioeconomic status and girls who are poor or don't have as much power or as much influence, if they get called the slut more often, then that would make sense that them being younger, right? Because when people get to their 30s, they start having decent jobs, and there's not as much of a socioeconomic factor in it.
Well, it might also be that thing where, you know, people generally use that word to mean trashy, and that's a comment on their socioeconomic status as well.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, the title or the little one line on that last link that I posted to the group says, "Are you a slut? That depends. Are you rich?" Really?
Yeah. It does matter.
Well, yeah, it's like the difference between, you know, insane
girls
and
can do it.
eccentric is how much money you have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like Paris Hilton. She's okay. She's rich. It's all right. She's just having fun. But
I think too, like this conversation around, you know, slut shaming and shaming for those reasons, I do agree that like within community or within, you know, sex positive and kind of gender fluid, gender positive groups, it's I don't see it as much anymore, but I think there's been an interesting dialogue around sexuality, especially since in the last couple of years there's been a lot more talking about trans people and queerness and just kind of gender bending in all of these different ways. I feel like people who are comfortable with those kinds of conversations often are a little more comfortable around this idea of like owning your sluthood, like being really comfortable with using a slut as a positive instead of a negative, not taking it as an insult, kind of taking it back, like any other word that other groups use, like.
But I think in community, one of the things we're seeing as well is that, again, like I said, I've always seen this sort of association with this concept of slut shaming, and not in terms of using the word slut, but slut shaming in general. A lot of times has come down to the ethics of sexuality, right? People who cheat on other people, or you know, whatever. But when we have better examples of good poly, for example, this notion of people sleeping with other people doesn't seem like sleeping around. Do you know what I mean? Like there is a sort of this ethical view of how we perceive sexuality, and people who engage in sex with different partners or engage in a lot of sex, and they're starting to become better examples of relationship style sometimes. So it's kind of hard to denigrate them for it, because they're all happy and shit, and like miserable people call them sluts because they're not having as much fun. Or
Well, but that makes it really easy, though. You said it makes it really hard. I think that makes it really easy for the masses to call them sluts, to have something to try and take them down a notch, or you know, prove
But-
something
How
dare they
moral
be
high
so
ground.
happy.
but my
Or-
point
or
was,
just
though,
forcing
Brian, is
it
in
to
community it happens less.
Yeah,
I think in
no,
community it
yeah,
happens less because a lot of people have taken ownership of that word. Like, yeah, I'm a slut. I'm a really good slut, in fact. And if they can't hurt you with it, then they're not going to say it. But that doesn't mean that they won't judge and comment on. They may not call you a slut, but they might be like, "Oh, that guy, he'll just fuck anything on two legs." You know, that is slut shaming. Maybe
And
he
even
will
the
fuck
number of
anything
legs
on
is
2 legs.
negotiable.
Sure,
that's true. That's true. You don't want to be like.
But that is slut shaming. You're not necessarily saying that guy's a slut. You're saying that this person has a low standard of what he'll stick his cock in, and from somebody who some people might see that, they might be able to let that roll right off and say, yeah, I have sex. I have lots of sex. I think more sex is better. And maybe I don't need to have, all of these, standards or conditions in place before I'll give up my valuable goodies. We still do have judgments in that way in the kink community, even though we don't toss the word slut around as much because we've kind of owned it. So can we talk about that a little bit?
This might be jumping the gun a little bit here, but is it equatable to oh he'll or oh she'll play with anybody? So it's not necessarily about even having sex. It's just someone's willingness just to play.
Sure. When you have that dungeon bunny who seems to be like full dance card all night, and it's just. Who's next? You got something? I want to play. Who are you? What's your name? We should have a scene. I think that, and I admit I have feelings about that, and I generally don't look very positively on that.
Hey, we can't leave the tops under that, though, because that shit happens too.
Technically, sir, would that make you a slut shamer?
No, because I won't say anything to them.
Would it be a play shamer then?
No,
well,
I would never.
I don't think so.
Hang on, and because I would never go up to somebody and say, you really shouldn't play around with everybody in the dungeon. I'm saying I don't know if there's anything that I can do to get rid of the baggage that I have in my head to be able to stop the judgment, the internal judgment. But I've got the practice and the, let's say, etiquette to not voice that out loud.
And that's really
and you might, Michael, but does other people?
Right.
Do we see that in the community where people are, basically, instead of slut shaming, play shaming? We'll just call it that.
I don't think that's fair, though, James. I see a lot of people doing that, but it's always behind people's backs.
Not to their face.
No.
Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice?
Well, and I don't think it's slut shaming. If somebody is playing with a bunch of people, and that makes you think, they play with everybody. I don't know that I want them to play with me because it makes you feel unspecial, or because you think they're, you just have a distaste for those boundaries. It's not slut shaming for you to go, I'm just not going to play with that person.
Right, but if
That's not slut shaming. You make a choice. Same with people you want to have sex with. If you don't want to have sex with them because you think they have sex with everybody, you're not slut shaming them by not giving them.
It's interesting though, because I can only speak for myself, but. When I encounter that, it's always a matter of motivation. I see people who play with a lot of people that I don't view that as negative, right? Now, I can sit here and explain all of the context for why that is, and I could see somebody who, on the surface, appears to be exhibiting the same behavior, but their reasons for doing them are different, or the way they go about it is different, and I'm going to have a different opinion on that. You know what I mean? Like, the amount somebody plays or who they play with generally doesn't affect me negatively or affect my opinion negatively. It's really more the motivation.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think that one of the points that we've maybe been missing, or that maybe needs to be brought up, is that maybe the difference between having your own personal opinion, which is totally fair and valid, and slut shaming is motivation. Like, are you trying to convince someone else, perhaps the person in question themselves, or are you trying to persuade other people to take your viewpoint on it? Whereas if you keep it to yourself, I don't see a problem with that, because
that motivation
have their own comfort levels.
That motivation that we talked about is making somebody feel less, or making you feel better about yourself and your choices. That seems to me like the big reasons to actually verbalize something like that. Now, what I was saying is, I can't escape the fact that I judge people in my head.
Of course.
I'd like to be better about that, but to actually, and Shane is right. As I think about it, whenever I hear even not even blatant slut shaming, but just kind of the implying or the hint of this, like they have a lot of partners, or they play with anybody, or whatever it is never to their face, in my experience.
So what is the difference?
They're trying to get everybody else to sort of have a lesser opinion of them, and I think that again gets reflected back at their low opinion of themselves. Go
Well,
ahead,
I
James.
think
I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, well, so if in the vanilla world they're more willing to slut shame and actually say it and try to establish that hierarchical view or stand, but we're not willing to do that in the community, or we just don't do that as much in the community. What is the difference? Why do we keep those thoughts and those judgments inside as opposed to in the vanilla world, they don't?
I have a few ideas about that. Does
That would be
anybody?
very interesting.
Well,
I've
too,
got a
though.
view
I
on
hope
that
it's
as
because
well.
we have more respect and more etiquette.
I don't know about that.
Well, to add to that, I think the whole purpose of shaming is to try to change somebody's behavior because you don't approve of it.
Or to change the person's opinion.
Or you're also trying to change the group's opinion of that person if you're doing it behind their back because you know you're not going to be able to affect them directly. When it rolls off of them, it doesn't matter. But if everybody else in the community isn't accepting of it, the slut shaming is a lot more effective.
Yeah.
But I disagree with your first statement that people are trying to change behavior with slut shaming. I don't think that they're looking to, rein in their desires or their actions. I think they're really just trying to make them feel like shit or get other people to view them negatively. Because if they stop slutting around, then what? They'd have to resort to you're ugly or you're fat or whatever it is.
Well,
Sometimes they're trying to shame.
Can I ask kind of maybe throw a monkey wrench in the works here? If we speak negatively about somebody's proclivities or interests, is that by default slut shaming? And the reason I ask is because having been around a long time, people will ask me my advice about playing with or getting into relationships with people. And so if I, using my judgment and my opinion, say, hey, I don't know that I would get into a relationship with that person because, they tend to get involved with X, Y, and Z people, or they tend to act like this in relationships, I feel like I'm being ethical in terms of answering the questions.
Right, that's
but
imparting wisdom.
And because you were asked versus you're just trying to hurt somebody.
Proactively
Right.
going after somebody.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying though. I mean, if my personal opinion, and Michael alluded to this, if I have an opinion about somebody who plays with a lot of people, that's a personal opinion, right? If somebody asks me my advice, I'm going to say, I don't think you should play with that person because I wouldn't play with that person.
Well, maybe the better answer would be, well, you can play with that person if you want, but you need to know that I've seen this person have a lot of other partners or do a lot of play. Maybe that's more a better objective way to go about that.
Maybe,
But I guess that
the point
depends.
is,
What if that person's okay with that though? Like,
I don't know exactly.
yeah, like what if that person doesn't? What if they don't care if that person has played with a lot of people? Like what if that's not an issue? But then it's an issue to you.
Match made in heaven.
Yeah,
No
Yeah.
problem.
I think what Shane is
Wonderful.
saying, Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, but your advice tends to be, would you play, should I play with this person? And you're thinking, would I play with this person, or would I let somebody I love play with this person? That's the benchmark of the advice that you give.
Well, in a lot of
what
ways,
would
but it's
what would a
interesting
Breda
because
do?
because our own opinion goes into that, right?
Absolutely.
There's no objective criteria for that.
Well, because sometimes that is the best, measuring. If somebody said, I'm looking for a babysitter and, so-and-so said that their daughter is babysitter, and I'm like, yeah, I know them, and I would let them watch my kids, that's the best endorsement that you can give somebody, or I would invite them into my house for a play party,
Right,
then
but this would be the opposite, though. This would be like, oh my God, I would never let that person watch my kid.
Right, but I guess that's my point, is if I give quote-unquote a negative review, am I slut-shaming that person behind their back?
I don't think so. And
You understand what I'm saying?
But that also depends on your tone. I mean, if that person asks you if you want to play with someone, and you say, oh, well, you didn't hear from me, but that girl gets around, obviously, you're going into territory that's kind of slut-shaming. But if you say to them, she tends to play with a lot of people. She's not really she doesn't really match for me. I don't know. You'll just have to figure that out for yourself. I mean, your tone really matters here, also.
I agree with that, but I also
trying to sway someone else's
Have you heard
opinion.
my
Is
tone?
different.
And you always want to be nice in that situation, because what if the person who's going to you for advice ends up like really hitting it off with the person you just talked shit about?
Or
That's
they
probably going to get back
Well,
to them.
Shane fails
How
at
many
that all
people
the
ask
time.
opinions of people they've already played with, right?
This whole thing feels very different to me because in the scenario Shane was asked, and if somebody went to Shane, if I went to Shane, it's not just because Shane is the tallest guy around. It's that I respect him and I value his opinion, and I know that whoever I go to and ask for advice, I'm going to get some personal opinion, and I think that there's value in knowing that you're going to get some personal opinion from people that you respect.
Well, and you might be stating point of fact. I mean, if that person does tend to go to a party, and it's common knowledge that they play with 7 different people at a party, you're not slut-shaming to say she tends to play with 7 people at a party.
Yeah. I mean, why does that matter,
Right.
If they ask for a snapshot of the person and that comes to your mind, I mean...
Especially if you think the person asking the question is going to have problems with that, or you think that's going to be a rub between them as play partners or relationship partners. Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to get back to why I think that slut shaming tends to be a little more subtle in our community, and maybe not as outward, and maybe not as prevalent. And I think part of that is because we fancy ourselves as enlightened folks. That it seems like there's a collective ethic of striving to do better. Like, this isn't the vanilla community in which we just have BDSM going on. This is a culture that we're trying to create where different kinds of play are okay, different kinds of relationship dynamics are okay, different kinds of, gender identity, sexual preferences. And so when we're slut shaming somebody and we're saying they do a lot of slutting around, I mean, first of all, a lot of us have taken that word back, so it doesn't mean as much, or it doesn't hurt as much when somebody uses that word. But I think there's a hypocrite alarm that goes off in some people, that they're like, man, I can't really comment because I play with a lot of people, or I can't really comment because I'm trying to create a better culture where this doesn't exist, or that's okay. And we fail sometimes. But I think that there is a push in that direction that helps keep it to a minimum.
Dude, that's deep. You're like Martin Luther King right now. No, some serious good shit.
I have a dream where nobody will be slut shamed.
Retweet. That was good. Yep. That was good. Whoever said that was nice.
Well, I think new people tend to be guiltier of this kink shaming or slut shaming within a kink community than older people are, or more seasoned individuals in the community are, because a lot of it is just ascribing the wrong meaning to an action that they see. So we talk about this in the newcomers meeting too. I may go into an event and kiss 5 people on the mouth. They're not all my partners. They're people that I have that established boundary with. We kiss on the mouth. But that is not, so to a newer person, they might think, well, that girl, she really sluts around. Look at her kissing all those people, right? Just because you do that does not mean that you're dating them or fucking them or any of those things. That's an established boundary that you have after having spoken with like, you have consent for that kind of behavior. So it's kind of funny that someone who comes into a kink community and talks all about, like, I'm all about consent and go us with our consent and our good boundaries. Well, that me kissing those 5 people on the mouth and not everybody else on the mouth, for instance, might be an example of a really good boundary, or me not being slutty, in fact. But if you take it out of context, it looks different.
Wait, but I think 5 kisses at meetings? I'll never get 5 kisses.
But I think that because we don't know you. You've been to like one event.
A guy can have feelings too. Sometimes he wants to feel pretty and be kissed. Okay?
I am in fact discriminating about people that I kiss.
But Josie, do you feel like? Hang on one second, Shane. Josie, do you feel like you missed the point on that? Where what if you were sleeping with 5 of those people? What would be the problem with that?
Right, and there is no problem there. That drives me crazy about. It's the same as people who, like, I don't care if you sleep around, but I do care if you sleep around and don't use protection. Listen, these are your choices. So if I am fucking those 5 people, I like to assume that I'm doing that because I've had a conversation with them. I know what my boundaries are with them. I have my own expectations with them, and that's my choice. And that's not being slutty, in my opinion. That's me making choices and living
Okay.
that way.
But somebody who uses a lower standard or doesn't, maybe the choices that they make are like, I want some dick, and the more the better.
Right.
Those are choices that they make, but then,
Right.
are they to be shamed? Is there a value in slut shaming?
My
Yeah.
issue, Michael, is that most times I've ever seen slut shaming, in my experience, it's been directed at women, and it's been directed at women by men who aren't sleeping with that woman.
Well, that is the
Yeah.
difference between a bitch and a slut. A slut will sleep with anybody. A bitch will sleep with anybody but you.
I'm dead serious. Like, I don't. In my experience, guys who talk about "quote unquote" the promiscuity of women are coming from a place of, here, I'm in my happy marriage, not fucking all of the people, and I am either jealous of these people who are having all of the sex that I'm not having, or that woman is sleeping with everybody except me, and I'm the one that really wants to.
Let me ask a question to Shane. If somebody says the word slut,
Yes?
automatically shaming.
No.
Fuck no, I say it all the time.
Can you just be like really mad, be like, oh, F that slut, and leave, and that's not actually the same as shaming. You think that's a different thing?
I disagree. In that context, you used it in a slut-shaming way.
Well, but to be fair, it's always about motivation. If I want to be hurtful, I'll be hurtful.
Okay.
And I'm going to pick a word that they are going to find hurtful, not a word that has any meaning to me.
I almost get the sense that the word shaming is more of a passive-aggressive thing. So, like, if you're in a close context and be like, and if it's one girl, I imagine saying, like, Cindy, she really shouldn't be such a slut all the time. But it's kind of a more stable thing, whereas, like, a guy just getting butthurt and angry because he didn't get any and shouting something and leaving. I don't know if the people take that as serious or not. I wonder if there's, like, a level of how serious you would take that.
I would actually say that men are probably more likely to call a woman a slut, however, directly to that person. But I think that a woman is more likely to do it behind another woman's back, and that's where you're getting in the shaming part.
Yeah,
I agree, and I disagree.
Even more so.
I agree. Well, because I see it on my end. I mean, I've been called a slut, not necessarily using those words and to my face, but generally there's a thing that happens with chest puffy dominants in the community that are like, oh well, Mr. Michael, whether it's the number of partners that I have or the way that I conduct my relationships, and they're trying to say something, trying to comment in a way, the way that I conduct my relationships and my sex life, that will deter that person from being interested in me.
Interesting.
That you're too old. You're too old for him. Yeah, it's a cock blocking tactic, and to be to. But they're using that like, he dates everybody, or he'll date anybody, or the idea, like, people that are not as maybe poly-minded as some others, this idea that, well, if you were to get involved with him, you would be much less important. The gist of it being like, you'd be one of several with him, so you'd mean jack shit. But if you were with me, I would treat you like a queen, and you'd be my, I think there's some motivations that way. The cock blocking. And I don't know if the cock blocking thing, I don't know if that happens if that's a motivation for women.
I've seen it happen with women before, definitely.
She's such a slut, and therefore you should fuck me instead of her.
So what would that be? Cunt pumping?
Clam jamming.
Oh, wait.
Clam jam.
I'm thinking, I'm thinking of not same sex. I've seen it with like, oh yeah, you shouldn't get with him because of blah, blah, blah. Because, like, it's like a female competitive thing. Like, especially when they're non-monogamous or they still are competitive, they, like, see it as like, oh, I'm just gonna, you shouldn't, it's like when you have a piece of cake and it's like, no, you really shouldn't eat this. It's really bad. Like, I'm saving you a lot. Yeah, it's like, because she wants it for herself. So, but I think that's more in monogamous situations.
Right. Clam jamming. I never heard that one. I always heard of it referred to as beaver dam.
Yeah, it's a lesbian.
Yes, that's Twitter. I think that's already on Twitter.
I always heard the term beaver dam instead of cock block.
Oh, I see.
See, I heard. It's funny you mentioned that, because on Facebook today I saw if a lesbian cockblocks another lesbian, then can we call that a beaver dam? On Facebook.
I would say the clam jam
really, really loud at work.
I like clam jam. I'll have to add that.
Rainy.
What are you doing,
It's a rhyme.
Kenzie?
It's a rhyme.
Sorry.
All right. So, do we have any more to add about slut shaming in the community or outside the community? And what I guess what I'd like to try and close with here is, what can we do aside from our own example? You know, if we're
These are
trying to
changes that you
we
wanna-
agree that slut shaming is bad. We agree that slut shaming says something negative about the person doing it, don't we? Or okay.
The attempt is there, yes.
So then what can we do besides our own example of not slut shaming, cock blocking, etc., to promote in our community an environment where that happens less or doesn't happen at all?
Well, I think it's the same thing as like what they say about bullying. Like, don't be of course you don't want to have like huge conflict all the time and get in fights with people, but like as much as you can, like just don't stand by. Like if you can kind of like change like if you're like in a group of people and they're slut shaming, like you could probably like either you can cut that out like
Or just
while
fucking
you're
call
in
them on it. Just
Yeah,
call them on it.
well,
You'd be like,
don't.
hey, you know
would
what?
say-
if you're not
Yeah,
trying
you're
to
just
start a
being
bunch
jealous.
of like conflict over it, because I don't think people would like being called a slut shamer in the community. I feel like that'd be a very hot button, but like you could probably change the subject or like just kind of diffuse that situation, and they would probably get the hint, and you wouldn't have to be so aggressive about it. But if you want to be aggressive, that's on you, man.
I've got a
I'm not
radical
aggressive.
idea.
I'm aggressive.
Well,
Michael's got a
stopping
radical
people
idea.
cold turkey from slut shaming too can be hard for some people. Like maybe it's totally their automatic response when they don't like someone to just call them a slut or to tell everyone, certain things about certain people in a community. Because let's face it, kink communities are small. They've all got one or two people that have a certain slut reputation. So stopping using that word can be hard, but I think that one of the things you can do to be an ally and not feed it and not be a part of that, phenomenon is to figure out why they're actually bothering you. Like when you have the urge or someone near you is calling that person like she's such a fucking whore all the time, what is really bothering you about her? Is it because she gets asked on more dates than you? Is it because she bothers you because she's so comfortable with her body? Like what is it that's bothering you, and kind of like go with that instead of she's a slut and then walk away from it.
So
Very
try to use logic to
think about it.
make
Learn
them
a little
own up to why it is. Like you're trying to get into like
But
the root
you're right.
causes of it.
Sometimes people just use that word interchangeably with poopy head. They just
Right.
they don't know what they're saying. They're just looking for
Trigger.
something to stab at them with.
Trigger.
you
Same
know.
as what used to be, that's gay. What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. Think about the words you use.
Right. Okay.
Wait,
Go ahead,
Michael.
Aaron.
Michael. So I've got this. I've got a radical idea. I think it'll work. I really. Yep. You know what? I got this solved. Aaron Bale, he fixed this. This is what we do. Michael, you're going to be the figurehead on this whole campaign.
I'm out
solve
already.
slut
Stop
shaming.
right there.
You're already. No. It's got to be you. This is what we do. Instead of minimizing the slut shamers, we just empower everybody that's a target. If there's a girl that gets called a slut or she gets made fun of, we like huddle around her and we like lift her up. We have like a makeover session. We do whatever we need to do to really empower that person.
Give them a
And then you
trophy.
empower every slut that there is, every target of slut shaming, and at the end you have nobody who's a target.
I agree,
You're
Wendell.
welcome. Next
We'll
problem.
We'll start giving out awards for it.
I want an award.
Thank you,
Can I have
panel.
a sticker? Can I have a gooey sticker?
Well, we're going to wrap this topic up, but thank you, panel, for your insights into slut shaming. Sorry we didn't get to actually shame any sluts here tonight. So we're going to shift it over to the second part of our little gathering tonight, and that is kink shaming. So let's talk a little bit about kink shaming and how it happens in our community, but something that I think we've talked about slut shaming in the sense of how that happens in the vanilla community. We don't really think about kink shaming happening in outside of the kink community. So let's talk a little bit. First, kink shaming. Let's talk about what it is and how it presents itself, and how to recognize when that's happening
Within or without?
within the community generally. Because
to
we have this philosophy that some people
I think
came up with a long time ago about your kink is not my kink, and that's okay. And
Right.
that's something that, I don't have to be involved in your kink. What you do, and I think that's the acceptance. That's what a lot of people sort of are aspiring to. But not everybody feels that way, and not everybody's very good at this.
Well, I think in especially again, I haven't been in the community all of that long, but from what I've kind of come to understand is that at least in the Louisville community, all the different kinks really get along a lot better than in most other areas. So I guess maybe more welcoming or more open to, or whatever the case is. The only thing I would say is that swingers are not. So if you're a swinger and that's your thing, you're not going to fit in well historically with the rest of maybe the Louisville community as much. But as opposed to other places where every specific kink is going to be they have their own meetings and it's all everything's going to be very fractured. Here everything is very combined except for the swingers, and they have their own club and we don't do that.
More accepting. I think that's a misnomer. No. I think it's because we're smaller
Okay.
geographically. I think our diversity is maybe not what it could be if we had, 800 people who call themselves regular members versus, a smaller number. I think your geography really dictates a lot of that. But when you're small, also, you can't have separate groups for everything. And when you're small, also, if you think you have a kink that might get shamed, you tend not to talk about it so much out loud.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
you tend to closet that shit right up. My personal
I'm in the
favorite
closet.
shaming is that, especially in communities that I've been around, it's super subtle and nobody thinks they do it. Like, everyone is so convinced that they have never kink shamed in their life. And my personal favorite is, well, he's into this stuff, which is fine for him. I mean, if he likes it, that's fine. It's just, I don't do that ever. I would never do that.
Here's the interesting thing, if I may. I firmly believe that every kink that you can think of is represented in the Louisville community. Like, whatever it is, Rule 36 as it relates to the Louisville community.
43.
But there is a reason why we think people aren't into kink X, Y, and Z, because the community as a whole, collectively, has quietly inferred that your kink, as much as we tell you is okay, really isn't.
Exactly. I feel like there is a bar of common acceptance
Yeah, absolutely.
in the community, and if you dip too far down below that, people really kind of give you a kind of a weird look, or may not know what to make of it.
And it is subtle, as Josie was saying.
Sometimes.
I don't see a whole lot of it outward, but Josie, the example that you gave, that's okay for him, but I'm not really into it. A lot of times it seems like it goes a step further, and it was like, ew, I mean, that's fine for them, but ew, icky,
gross.
That.
Or the other one is like, that's a hard limit for me, and then you get the casual look around the room of everybody agreeing. That's the hard
Everybody knows
community.
Everybody knows what that means.
Yeah, and I think, so when people think of kink shaming, they think it's something like slut shaming, like, what a whore. Like, very clearly, that's slut shaming. In kink shaming, I'm trying to think of, so one of the best examples, I think, is that when you go up in a dungeon, let's say you got some needles. You play with said needles. You don't use a glove. Anyone who has done that can tell you they got kink shamed. There's no way they walked out of that place and didn't have at least 4 people go, oh, so did you see them? They were not using gloves. Did you see that? They didn't walk up to you and say, fuck you and your needle scene, but they were very judgy of your, whatever they felt, your disregard for hygiene or your, I don't know, your risky play or whatever it is. That's kink shaming. It looks like that.
And I want to agree with Josie there. We started off by saying, that's not my kink, and that's fine as not being part of kink shaming. But when people do share the same kink, that's when you really see the kink shaming, like Josie said. Or, for example, if I did a rope scene and did some throat rope or didn't carry a pair of scissors with me, the same thing as the needles not wearing gloves or having the hygiene issue. I think the kink shaming really happens when you have groups of people in the same kink.
See, I don't agree with it. I don't agree. In some cases, I would call that kink shaming. But that's another thing. That's more of like a competitive thing. You know, I feel like I have all the answers. I like everybody to know how smart I am and how experienced I am. And so I'm going to tear down somebody else's scene for the lack of precaution or for, you know, all of these things that they think are important in a scene. When I think of kink shaming, though, I mean, there's a difference to me between shaming someone's kink, like you're into XYZ and I think that's gross, or you're fucked in the head, or there's something mentally wrong with you. There's a difference between that and judging someone's scene. Like even when you're standing around watching someone else's scene and you have a comment about it, like that's not the way I would do it, or I don't necessarily call that kink shaming, because I know that a
That's
lot
just
of that
person shaming.
yeah
There seems to be some very a lot of these words are inherently ambiguous, so the definitions are not very clear, and there's a lot of really interesting overlap that's going on, and where do you define across kind of a line there?
No, I mean, personally, I agree with Michael. I don't think that that's the case. I think what we're talking about are the things that people don't talk about. There's a difference between insulting somebody for their style or their perceived skill at something. That's just a dick move. But that's not kink shaming, right? What I think that we can agree on is there are just things that if people talk about, there's going to be somebody who goes,
Okay, so let's.
that's good for you.
I think there's room
Let's
for
get some
both.
examples out there,
And
because it's easy to say, like, you know, there's these things, but you know, let's be specific. What things, you know, do we not, you know?
Absolutely.
consent
I'll give you one,
to?
James. I happen to know for a fact that there are people in the community who are into this kind of thing, but you never hear people talk about it because of the reaction. Diaper play,
There you go.
right? You say diaper play, people go, oh, well, that's nice for you, right? And whether it's kink shaming or not, people go, okay, never bringing that up again.
Right. And we used
You're
to
not
have
wrong.
we used to have a thing. Yeah, I had a discussion panel at one of our munches on littles, and invited some people who were into littles play, and another ABDL guy who was sort of in the surrounding community, and asked them to be on a panel, and they were basically saying, like, this is a hot button, we get a lot of shit, are you going to protect us, you know?
Yep.
Are you going to let this turn into a shit show with people yelling at us very passionately that we're, you know, fucked in the head, pedophiles, whatever, you know, whatever insults they want to come up with? And I was like, I will make sure it stays civil. And it did, it stayed very civil. And I know that there were people who were like, well, how could I have missed that? Because I'm little. And I was like, really? You're little? Because they were like, that's not something that they wore on their sleeve or that they did in the community. Now it's become a lot more accepted in our community. But there are, you know, even just recently, it was kind of like, yeah, you could consider us sort of, you know, daddy girl, daddy daughter. But we don't do that when we're having sex, you know. Like when it's sexual between us, then like, and I was like, really? Why not? Because you should try
doing
that
it wrong.
sometime.
You're wrong. Your
And-
kink is not okay in that sense.
Well, they were even,
Missed
you
the
know,
boat.
they were even kind of excusing themselves, like they were afraid that I would pass
They were
judgment on
qualifying
them.
it. And
Yeah.
Well, and there is a lot of qualification, I think, in the community. And I do this a lot. I will feel people out. I will drop little subtle hints or you know, give them just a drop of the pool and then see what their reaction is. And some people take really well to it and other people don't. And I find that I make really solid connections with people that will reciprocate in that sense.
So it pays to be a little more out about these things, even if it's just peeking your head out a bit.
If you want to participate in them.
I think it does pay to be a little bit more out. And some people jump in the pool, whereas I stick a toe in and then see how the water feels on, person by person basis.
But I think Josie,
but I will say it feels really good to have people that I am like totally fucking. Here is all the sick, crazy shit that's in my head. Let's talk about this, and they just eat it up. Like that feels good, and that's a solid connection, and I enjoy that.
I wanted to get back to something that Josie brought up, which was what I call the sort of safety patrol. This is this is something that you see at parties and folks who are looking on and making judgments about people's threshold, their tolerance for risk, and making comments about their precautions and how they minimize risk. And it seems to me like that. Now, Josie, you were saying that you consider that kink shaming, and I don't consider that kink shaming. Shane says it's person shaming, and I think that that's maybe closer to the mark the way that I view it, which is you're looking for something. There's some other kind of issue that you have with the person, and that's the thing that you can do, to tear them down a little bit, like. Well, I
Right,
saw
but
them
that's
do a needle
shaming.
scene in the dungeon, and they weren't wearing gloves, and I would never play with somebody who wasn't willing to wear gloves in the dungeon when they were sticking needles in me,
But that's
etc.
shaming. That is exactly the same as if we were having the conversation about slut shaming and someone was saying, I heard that she had sex and she doesn't always use a condom with those people, and I'm not saying anything, but I mean, I think that's just disgusting and really, really dangerous. Now, would we not call that slut shaming?
Right, but to be fair though,
We would. So that is absolutely kink
But
shaming,
they're not
especially
saying.
if
But
you
they're not
treat
saying.
your
They're not saying. Well, they're into needles, and I think that's kind of fucked up.
yeah, they're not.
Needles, they're
No,
fine.
but they're saying they have an issue with you putting your fingers in my blood, and that's kink shaming.
Wait. Well, the definition of kink is
All right.
is
Aaron, let me
I don't
stop
know
you
the
there.
definition.
Let me stop you there, because you do that. You do the definition thing, and they don't always apply in that we use terms in a certain way.
Oh, okay.
I think in general we agree. What we're talking about when we're talking about kink or we're talking about shaming. The nuances might be a little bit different, but I see your point, Josie, that maybe I should start considering that as kink shaming. It's just always felt different to me, and it felt like for different motivations.
Well,
I
some
feel
of
like
those
Josie's
things too are
exactly on point.
different.
I feel like Josie's exactly on point because I feel like there are levels of play with any given activity where there is a taste or a bar or a level of acceptance. And in our particular community, the level of acceptance is, oh, well, some needle play is okay so long as you wear gloves. But to some people, it's kinkier if they don't. It might be, the blood play itself for them. And I want to put my fingers in your blood and I want to smear it around. And that feels like, well, it's okay at this level, but not at that level.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know
this
where
is-
I
this-
lie on
this is
that
exactly-
because
this is
I
very
see both
much like-
sides.
Well, because some people would say, well, that's not a kink shaming thing. That's a safety thing. That's safety in the dungeon. That's risk-aware consensual
Michael,
kink,
Exactly.
My
Safety is
experience,
the
though,
same
is that people who rely on safety are trying to find a way to shame somebody, but not make it look like they're shaming somebody.
Ah,
Pick
Right.
on
That was
somebody
kind
for
of
their
a little
safety,
1-2 swap.
and I'm okay with their kink, but they as a player are really not good.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
You're saying that that's what they're implying. I'm okay with the kink.
No,
but-
I think that what I'm saying is I think that the safety thing comes from a very negative place. Like, people want to be able to say something, but you can't just say, I think Jim's a dick. But you can say, I don't think Jim plays very safely. It's like we're doing a service. We're not really just bitching about somebody.
And it doesn't seem personal.
But really, we're bitching about somebody.
Yeah, and we're
It's not us,
commenting
that's
on their
weird.
we're commenting on their character, their judgment, and their prowess and knowledge at the same time.
Right, but I think that all of that does come back to their character. In the same way that slut shaming is a reflection of our perception of their character, I think a lot of those safety discussions are our personal reflection, our perception of their character. Like, if they were a better person, they would play more safely. But really, we're just saying we think they're a dick.
Aside from, actual
Sometimes.
dungeon rules that are in place, and some of them might be in place for the safety of other people in the dungeon.
Yeah.
or the comfort of other people in the dungeon. But aside from that, I mean, is there a legitimate kink shaming that can or should happen when you see certain kinds of play, or
If it's not in the
safety
rules,
precautions? Well, I mean, safety precautions that just make you go, "Oh my God, they're gonna actually do that? Do they know how dangerous that is?" You
Yeah,
know,
anybody who's ever come within 4 inches of a neck with a rope.
Yeah.
Oh
Interesting
man,
to
that's
Google how
that's
many
a
people
really
die that way.
that's a conflict for me, and I don't know if that's because I'm semi-new or what, but I kind of feel like, oh, I don't even want to say that. I feel like I'm
Say it,
wrong.
say it, Kenzie.
See, no, but the point
You
is,
are wrong and you should feel ashamed.
Say it, Kenzie.
I feel like
no,
I
but the
feel like
bottom
there's
line is, we sit here and talk about safety, but the reality of it is half the shit that we do isn't safe. I mean, we can talk about whether or not it's safe to wear gloves when you're doing needles, but poking needles into people in a dirty dungeon is pretty much inherently risky on its own.
Right. No, I don't think.
Get off
I
on.
think where I would have an issue is if it's something that potentially would be a threat to me who's not in the scene.
But that would
Like,
make it.
oh, they're playing with. Well,
Yeah.
in some cases, I don't think so. Like I don't know. I
Okay.
don't want to go deeper
I
into
think
that.
I think the example. Okay, I don't know if this is what Kenzie was getting at, but let's say the dungeon allows, rope on neck. Okay, and we all agree that rope suspension, rope play comes with its risk. Rope on neck comes with increased risks, but then somebody has a mishap and a horrible death. Okay, and then all of a sudden there's all this attention brought to the dungeon. There's all of this, whether it's press, police, that your acceptance of this risk, even though that it might be allowed in the dungeon, puts us at risk if something goes wrong. There might be something legitimate to that.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
it's not
that's-
even legal,
hold on,
is it? You can't
Michael.
let people hang each other.
I don't
think that's
disagree
what
with
she
that,
meant.
but that's not where I hear people talking about that kind of stuff.
I agree.
That's what
not
I'm
usually their
thinking of,
point.
though. That's what I'm thinking of is like, I think the only reason I'd ever be a safety patrol person is if it's like, this could come back and hit me. Like, if, like that, but I think it'd be an extreme situation. Like, I don't think it would just happen. It'd be like something very specific.
And the thing that we are missing when we think in those terms is that there is a lot of risky shit already going on.
Right,
and
right,
a lot
right.
of potential for mishap, and it's just our judgment that, like, okay, we're fine with this threshold, but then when it reaches this threshold, we're not okay.
When
And
it
our
reaches a threshold that threatens me who is not in the scene, that's when I have an issue.
What I'm saying is it all threatens you. And if
I
that's
guess.
so much of an issue, everybody's threshold's different, and that's
Hey, Michael,
yes,
you want
Shane.
another really good and obvious, not a dungeon rule kink shaming that happens all the time in this community?
Please.
Play and drinking.
Ah, okay.
That's not kink shaming.
It's
Your
not.
kink is not getting drunk and
That's
smacking people
risk
around.
No, but I'm not saying
You
drunk.
happen to be drunk.
I'm not saying drunk. I'm saying the number of people in other communities that have commented that we allow alcohol.
Can we call it risk shaming? I would
That's
like
not
that word.
kink shaming. Your kink isn't the drinking part, so shaming the drinking isn't kink shaming.
No, kinking the drinking and playing, or the presumption that we are playing. Right? It is casting aspersions on the way that we do things. It's a hot button issue.
I think Aaron, Aaron, you kind of hit it there when we're talking about risk shaming.
Yeah.
Because it seems like a lot of the things, with the safety patrol or with the drinking in the dungeon or whatever, that's, I'm not willing to take certain risks. You're willing to take certain risks. And that means that you are an unsafe player, or you don't have the safety of your partners in mind, or you're not considering the rest of us who might be present. There is an element to that, for sure.
It sounds like a similar but separate type of a discussion or topic.
Oh, well, then I think that if I did, I think I'd fall more into a risk shamer than a kink shamer.
Oh, I'm an open, blatant risk shamer.
But I don't want to be either, but I'm
Just
just
all
saying
you.
that I think I'd be more of a risk shamer.
Put an
But
extra
All
condom
of these activities have inherent risks to them. So ascribing this kind of different set of rules to this different other layer of risk is pretty unfair. I mean, what you're really saying is if you don't do it the way that I do it, the way you do it is wrong.
Yep.
Or if the World Health Organization
That's
says don't
kink
do that, then
shaming
I
for
go with
sure.
Yeah, and this idea of, common accepted practice, because people would generally agree that wearing gloves when you're doing needles is an accepted practice. But I think things are kind of getting away from that. Like, hey, whatever two consenting adults want to do, if the other person, you know, negotiated that they're fine with you not wearing gloves,
Right.
then hey, that's fine. But when it then starts to affect, others in the dungeon space, where it's like you're going to be bleeding all over the place
Yeah,
and it's going to be impossible to clean up.
That's
then,
one inherent factor. If you're bringing your kink into a social setting, the rules are now different. If you're doing something at home and it's just you two, that's between you two, that's nobody else's business.
Right,
once
but
you
we're
start
also
bringing other people
assuming
into
that
it,
that couple is
then it's-
following dungeon rules, and there are usually rules around fluids. So if you're breaking those rules, obviously you're
I
breaking
know,
the
but
rules. That's different.
we have these rules about fluids, and again, we fall back on safety. The reality of it is if I was spraying water across the dungeon, that's not unsafe. It's still a dick move, though, because someone's got to clean that up. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
we call it a safety rule because,
No, technically you can slip and fall. That's a safety issue.
all right, well, I can't argue with that
on one
logic.
of those little yellow thingies with the little symbol with the dude that's falling on it.
Yep,
Don't
yep,
slip
there
and
you go. Yep. Totally the same, and I stand corrected.
Well, what I want to know is, is there a point where kink shaming is acceptable, desirable? Is there a situation where kink shaming is appropriate?
I don't think so.
I don't
Yes.
think so either.
Yes.
I think even if there were, it's more dangerous to err on the side of kink shaming than it is to err against it. It seems
But
like
what? I
kink
would like
shaming
an
is more
example
used
of
for negative.
appropriate kink shaming. 'Cause I don't think I'm getting it.
Shane
I like to
Shane
think
said
I'm pretty
yes.
well-grounded in this stuff.
I said yes.
Do you have an example?
It's interesting. I don't know that I have a specific example, but the reality of it is that our community is essentially quietly self-policing. We had this discussion, Michael, a while back on another topic when we were talking about things like what are our hard limits, and it's like, do we really have to talk about our hard limits? Like the three standard ones, like, oh, I'm not into kids, animals, or death. Well, like if you're fucking a dead puppy, then that's not something we need to have to tell you is wrong. But I think there are these layers of things that exist above that the community has sort of quietly said isn't acceptable, and in most cases there's no reason for it. Now, I'll give you a great example specifically. One of the things that almost never comes up because it has been inherently a part of our community for so long, as you are well aware, Michael, is sex in the dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Wait,
And now,
what's the rule?
hold on, stop. We're not talking about the fucking rules. There
I
used
don't
to
know
be
the
a
rule.
rule about it, but the understanding is that in dungeons in Kentucky and Indiana, sex doesn't happen in dungeon spaces.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We just go
Generally.
there presuming it's not going to happen. And most people don't check the rules on it because we take for granted that's the way it is. But that is a community standard that has developed as opposed to, in many cases, an actual rule. And so when people come into the community, they are essentially indoctrinated into what is acceptable and not acceptable, and that is done through a subtle form of assimilation, which, if you put a name to it, is kink shaming.
Yeah, but I just have an issue with this. I think it's kind of a semantic issue. I mean, I think I agree with you, but making a rule, about having sex in a dungeon or not having, depending on the party, usually that's done because they felt like for some reason it made the party better for everybody, it made it safer. They were worried about people who were saying that it was going to bother them in some way. Like, they made it a rule. There's one thing to make a rule because it simplifies things, or whatever your reasoning is. The powers that be make a rule, versus people in the corner going, oh yeah, I mean, so and so tried to have sex at the party last year, and what a kink shaming versus making a rule. Not the same thing.
Right, I know, but
Making a rule to be constructive, I don't have a problem with.
I don't know if
Kink
James is
shaming,
still
I don't think it's
there.
constructive ever.
But one of the issues that we have had when we've been in mixed spaces with swingers, for example, is swingers don't understand why we're not having sex at parties. And so they get pushed to the side because we think that they're quote-unquote wrong.
Yeah, or the gay kink group, they don't understand either.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean I can't fillet somebody in here? That's ridiculous.
Right? And so we essentially create these boundaries through our impression of what is acceptable. as opposed to what the rule is.
Yeah,
Right.
I didn't know
there's
that boundary till today.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of shaming. I have a different example, and this is because, we have this idea that some activities are really not BDSM. They're something else. They're abuse, or they're illegal, or they're immoral. And so we don't even really talk about them as being part of kink. But when somebody says that their kink is going to the laundromat and stealing panties from girls and, going home and rolling around in them, that's something I would still call that a kink. And yes, it's illegal. But I think that that is a good example of, something that we would say, hey, not cool. Like it
What if
isn't
they,
okay.
leave $20 every time, just like.
No, it's
Yeah,
still
but
not
I
cool.
wouldn't give them the dignity of calling that a kink because it's not two consenting adults. They have a fetish that perhaps we could shame, and that would maybe be constructive if that laundromat was getting thieved a lot, or the women there felt like they were being put upon.
We have this idea. That's why we don't talk about these things, because we have the idea of kink or BDSM being consensual by definition. And there are a lot of things, or whether it's like subway groping.
Are you saying we should question that, or no?
I think that for me it falls under, somebody's kink. If they say that they have a fetish or they have a kink for these particular activities, consensual, non-consensual, illegal or not, that is something that if somebody had, mentioned that to me at a munch or a party, like, this is what I'm into frauderism, I'd be like, yeah, not okay. I'm not fine with that. And I think you're an asshole because of it. And I think I think that might be an example of when it might be appropriate. Some people wouldn't agree. They'd be like, "Oh, that's pretty judgy on your part," But I stand by it. Like, okay, that's judgy on my part. But are there any other, within the activities that we consider, legal, consensual, and like ethical? No, I don't think that there's any room for it.
Oh God, that's a real thing.
I mean, you can certainly disagree with people, and you can certainly be the guy at the party who says, neck rope, that's fucked up. But if I'm over there doing neck rope, I just don't think it's ever the right decision to chuckle in the corner and go tell everyone that those people are irresponsible, or that they're stupid, or that should never happen, or just lose your mind over it. It doesn't do anything constructive. It doesn't achieve any good goal.
People feel like, especially with breath play, and this is kind of related to neck rope as we're calling it,
right?
That there is
not neck rope, to be clear, neck rope.
Right, that's what I said.
Yeah, be clear.
That some people feel like with some activities there is no safe way to do it. That there's not a level of understanding or risk acceptance that is okay, and they consider breath play to be one of those.
Wait! Why can't you just do it at home? Why she got to bring the cops here?
Regardless, we're not necessarily talking about a dungeon party. We're saying, that's that kink shaming, like, oh, they do breath play at home, wherever, while they're camping in the woods. Doesn't really matter. They do breath play, and I consider that to be unethical or bad because there is no safe way to do it.
I see what you're saying.
I think the what should be the appropriate response to that is not to shame or not to talk about, but if you have a personal problem with one particular activity, don't engage in it. Or if you are, you have a partner and you don't want your partner engaging in it. There are things that, I don't have a level of understanding to feel comfortable with. One of those things is hook suspensions. I don't know enough about them, and I probably would not let one of my girls engage in that activity. I don't feel like that's shaming. I feel like that's, either ignorance or, personal risk assessment. Right. And I feel like that's okay. Yeah. So long as I'm not going around saying, oh my God, that guy such and such, that guy John does hook suspensions, he's fucked up, and stay away from that crazy asshole.
Yeah, the difference really seems to be that if you're saying, I don't want that risky behavior around me for personal safety reasons, is different than you shouldn't be doing that for moral reasons. That seems to be kind of the difference. It seems
I
like if you're
think-
doing it for yourself, that's fine, whatever, that's your own business. But
Yeah.
if you're then casting some sort of judgment when it actually doesn't affect you in any way, that's kind of, by definition, the shaming part, right?
I agree. But then I think that from the perspective of someone, and I'll use the breath play as the example again, for somebody who feels like there is no safe way to do breath play and therefore no ethical way to do breath play, that they are doing the community and everybody involved a service by speaking out against it and shaming people out of doing it.
But is that their job?
Why do they care if two people kill each other? So what? What do you care?
I'm not even going to go
Well,
there.
if me and my consenting
business.
adult
They don't do it.
partner have decided there is a safe way to do breath play, that's on me and my partner to make that decision. I think that's the thing. I don't have a problem with people disagreeing with me there, but I do have a problem with them using this guise of it's not safe based on empirical evidence in the universe, and I'm going to go tell people that you're an unsafe player. That's where it turns into shaming. But you saying I'm never going to engage in that because I don't know enough about it or I feel unsafe when I do it, that's not shaming. I don't have any problem with that.
But by the way, you're not going to do it like at the place where we're at, though, right?
Yeah, I will.
You know what? I've actually
The cops are coming. We're all.
I've had an epiphany moment in the past. This conversation, I think my opinion has changed since the last time I spoke. I was kind of agreeing with you, Aaron, about like, oh, but I'm in this space, and so like if something happens and the cops show up, then I'm automatically put into this. I think I disagree with that now, because ultimately when you're going to a dungeon party, that's a risk in itself. Someone could have a heart attack and die.
Good point.
No one's playing with them, and so like
Good point.
ultimately, okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Ultimately, even if they're playing or not playing or doing something risky or not, it's a risk for you being there. So I think my opinion from earlier was wrong.
And you'll
I
have to
think your
forgive me.
opinion might have just influenced my opinion too. Am I allowed to?
You'll have to forgive me because I love all of this discussion about what if. I'd like to see a show of hands. Who's been at a party where the cops have shown up?
Now, by the way, wait,
And
hold on.
fuck all happened.
By
Fuck all.
By the way, when I do say the word cops, it's just very loose thing for measurable negative consequences. So
Yeah,
also
how about
pissing off the
12 cops
landlord,
showing up and clearing a
also
dungeon?
having legal ramifications.
Right. Well,
Your-
what I'm thinking of,
ramifications,
Shane,
et cetera.
I'm thinking of WD, whatever our news station is, like panning of people out in the parking lot. Like that's what I'm thinking of. And there's me, like in the parking lot with my hands over my face because they're pulling somebody on the. That can happen regardless as if they're playing or not, if it's risky or not. So my opinion from earlier was wrong.
Well, and that.
But I
that
wanted to say
then
that.
it then pays to know what the policy and the rules of the space that you're playing in are,
Mhm.
because if neck rope is acceptable in that space, then you have to understand that you're taking a certain risk by going to parties. I've had people
That's fair.
actually, because I started the sex allowed parties. I had somebody send me a message saying like, "Is that now policy? Is it now at all your parties?" And I was like, no, it's just at these particular ones as an option for people who prefer that in the dungeon. Because I know that in their mind they were thinking, because if it's that way across the board, then I'm not coming to that space anymore. It's their choice to not, if they feel like that opens the space up to, a certain element or a certain level of safety, or puts them on the wrong side of some legal problem, then they can choose not to come. So they just ask the
Right.
questions so that they could be informed, and then they make a decision whether they want to be there or not. And people
Right.
have to do that when they're looking at the kinds of play involved. Because if it's something that squicks you out, or something that you can't be around, or something that you're going to object to, if it's allowed, then you need to be braced for the possibility of that happening. So
Right.
Well, people
And
seem
that's
to
what I was.
understand that you managing your own risk is never a problem, but you judging me for managing mine is kink shaming. I think that's the difference that I'm putting on that
The
line.
judging, isn't it? It's the when they act upon those judgments.
Right.
And
Well
so,
said.
and I keep going back to the last conversation that we had about landmines and things. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the players, or is it the person who has the problem? And again, if two consenting adults are playing in a certain way, and no matter what my judgment or anyone else's is, that's on them playing, not on me and what my landmine might be, or what my judgment on the way that they play is. So again, it goes back to is the people that are playing understanding of the risk, and have they chosen to accept it? And if they have, then it's none of my goddamn business.
Well, it shouldn't be, but people seem to make it their business.
But they shouldn't.
But I can, though, I can easily see how that happened, because I kind of thought like that for about however long that conversation went, and then I was like, you know what, it doesn't actually work like that. Yeah. So I can see why people make that mistake, because I just made that mistake while we were discussing this.
Broadening horizons, one blonde at a time.
It's been presented to me that, well, what if my kink is kink shaming?
Yeah, right.
Oh, Jesus.
Fuck you.
Oh, Jesus.
Is that a time where kink shaming is not okay? When you're kink away, you
asshole.
As long as your other kink is being called a douchebag, then it's totally fine.
Well, what if my kink is setting off nuclear bombs and destroying all humans? Right. That's trolling. Let's just say.
Trolling all of you. So thank you guys. I think this will end this little chapter here. But thanks to the panel for a very enlightening discussion. And we should be back in 2 weeks to do a couple of other topics. There will be, I haven't decided whether it's going to be 2 weeks in a row or an actual 3-week break that we take, because it turns out that we have Christmas and Thanksgiving are going to fall on Kink Tank nights, so I think we might flip them at some point.
Cancel Christmas.
So that we got cancel Christmas. There's a Kink Tank, bitches.
No.
Yeah.
You know what? Somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to put a nail in that coffin. I'd say we start right here.
So we will end it right here with thanks to everyone and the viewership, and see you next time we're live.
Thanks, Michael.